All right, so let's have a little look at this new feature, which is in PD Pro Howler 7.2. In the animated filters collection, right there at the bottom, there is one called Motion Prediction Module. Let's see what that does. You know, essentially, let's say, for instance, here's an example of a short video. It's 194 frames, not very long, and a little bit shaky, but that's okay. But it goes too fast, and what we'd like to do is perhaps slow it down a little bit. You know, create more frames, have some stuff in between. And there's really two basically different ways to do that. One that we've had for a while is that you would go to the animation menu and look under the frames to do a time stretch. And that will work in many cases, but there are sometimes some side effects, especially if there are some parts that are moving fast, like this in the front will be moving faster than the ones in the back. What you can do is you could go here and say you want twice as many frames, right? You click on this ×2 and you got 388 frames after that, or you can click it more or even more. And now if you do just that, so let's say we do this many, 776, that will not really do a good job, because each frame is held for 4 frames as it's moving before the next one is coming in. So you essentially have it slow down, but you don't see any transition. You don't see any nice blended transition. The goal really would be, in this case, to go with loading this original and then applying the time stretch, but with the frame blending. Okay, so that would be here, time stretch, and we would go maybe, let's go to 4 times, right, and do the frame blending. But when you do the frame blending, one of the problems is that you will get transitions from one frame to the other. That, you know, like right now I have 1 frame, and then the next frame is going to be pushed back, and we have 3 new frames in between as we get 4 times more frames. And that will potentially create some swimming effects, especially in the foreground. You see it right there where it's moving pretty quickly, and there is going to be transitional side effects. You can see them better if you move in and animate that way. You know, basically you can tell what's happening here is there are some frames. Okay, let's say we're on 1 frame here, and then the next frame is going to be reached in about 3 or 4 frames, 4 frames later. Before we get there, we do the blending, and it's going to gradually fade away the current frame as it's gradually blending in the new and fading in the new frame. And that is what the blending does, the frame blending. And it's good in most cases, but you know, you can see in a very drastic case, if you had something like just a black line, and then you want the next frame to contain a black line that's moved a little bit over to the side. If you show the transition here, let me clear a couple of these frames. In fact, let me just create a blank one here. There you go. So we got this frame, and then I'm going to the next frame here and the next one here. Well, in this case, they're not even overlapping, right? So we got this frame here and going over here. And if we do the frame blending, we will see this line go away gradually as this one comes in. And so let's do that for just let's see, where is it? Right there. Under the frames, go to the time stretch, right? And so we're going to go 4 times or 8 times more frames here with the frame blending enabled. And so what's happening is that now, as you transition from one frame to the other, you see that next one appear while this one is disappearing. Okay, that's the frame blending. That's to be expected. But it has certain limitations, and one of the limitations, if you're dealing with video, is that you will see it kind of come in and come out in a way which might be a little bit disturbing and distracting. You know, it would be nice if there was a way to perhaps have this line kind of move or transition or morph over to the right as it's blending away, so it's not doing too much of a static blend away, fading away at this same position. And so that's something that we can attempt to address. Let's go back to loading this ABI here, the original of the Cactus walkthrough. and take a look at it again. So the original is that it's not a perfect camera shot. In fact, when you look in here, it's got a little bit of motion blur, it's got a little bit of noise there too. But what we'd like to do is slow it down without that swimming effect from the frame blending. So what we'll do is we'll go to that new filter, which is in the animated collection, and it's called Motion Prediction Module. And so what the Motion Prediction Module lets you do, first of all, it can analyze the images in the video sequence to see which ways different parts are moving. So I'm talking about essentially doing something similar to this here. When you look at the grid, you can go and do a visible grid. Imagine we were to slice the image into a bunch of squares, and you can adjust the grid spacing here. That would be basically the equivalent to what we do here when we change the spacing on these grids, on these squares. So essentially we now have small squares, and we're analyzing which way each of the images there are moving. It's kind of like doing a motion tracking on each of these squares, as if you had the motion tracker on each square attached, and you try to determine where does that particular square go on the next frame, and then the next frame, and so on. So each time that we have a frame, we look at slicing it into a ton of different smaller frames, small squares, and let's take the example of 16 by 16. There you go. So it would basically then look at that, and each of those squares is going to try to see if it moved, and by how much, in which direction, and so on. Now, as it does that, it can analyze it and then render that, give you a motion analysis, basically a graphic rendering of which way each of those tiles moved. That's what you get if you choose the motion analysis. The motion analysis will be a red to green graph that shows which way parts are moving. In fact, let's do this really quickly just to get an idea. Let's go here, and you see all sorts of stuff happening here. There's a lot of reddish yellow in the front where it's a little bit faster moving, and more green and dark or no movement in the back. Right, so that's that. It's not tremendously impressive. There may be some ways to use this, by the way, perhaps as an animated displacement map, and we'll experiment with that as well. But basically what this does now is it shows you a graph of where it thinks all of these different tiles and blocks moved, each on their own. And as it goes from, it's an adaptive move from one frame to the next, right? So let's go back to the original video, load AVI, and there it is, 194. And we have, now what I'll do is, let's skip this option, the scan for dropped frames. And what I'll do is I'll set it to the maximum, 16 by 16, and then the search distance, there's not really a whole lot of fast movement, so I don't have to go all the way up high here. But what I'm going to do is to tell it to not do the motion analysis, but instead to introduce some blur. It's going to keep the total frame count pretty much the same, maybe give or take 1 or 2 frames, but it's going to introduce blur that is going to be basically the result of what the analysis did, right? So what we do, and in fact we can even show the motion vectors. We can show little red dots that show which way it sees each of these blocks move as it's analyzing it. So the introducing the motion blur is that next way to use it. Now it's kind of difficult to see. Let's zoom in. There you go. You can see in some of these red lines there that's showing up. Those are the motion vectors that indicate which way each of those tiles is moving frame for frame as we're going and analyzing the video on the fly. And as we're doing that, we then blur it. We produce a little motion blur on that block in that direction by the strength of that particular analysis on the block. So we're doing basically adaptive motion blur. Motion blur which is strong if there is big motion, and which motion blur which is very little motion blur if there is very little motion. So if some parts of the image is not moving, well, you won't see any blur happening in that area. But if other parts are moving faster, you'll see motion blur. So right now we have this, and we get a little bit more motion blur in the front than we get in the back. But it's still moving too fast, and we got still a little bit of shaking going on because it was not a very steady camera. So what really the ultimate use of this is, in my mind, is to use extrapolate frames. Alright, so what we'd like to do is to essentially say produce more frames in between, and produce them by doing a blending transition, but only on the small block and in the direction with the blurring in the direction in which it's moving. So that we kind of get only tiny little bits moving on their own and hopefully have it actually stay a little bit cleaner without that side effect that we had in the earlier example with the time stretching approach. So let's go back to the original AVI file. That's this one here. And let's see what's happening there. So we have now the approach where we will be using 16 for the grid spacing, and the search distance I think was fine. Fudge factor, there's not much noise, the images are not changing so much. 400 default is probably fine. If you want to spend more time and get slightly better quality, you might go to a stochastic 5 or 15, where it's going to average neighboring frames as well, 2 in front, 2 in back, and look at them a little bit closer. The refinement pass gives you additional higher quality. That takes a lot of time though, so this is highly compute intensive. Let's do without the show motion vectors, and this time extrapolate frames, and I'm going to go just to 2. So that means if we currently have 194 frames, we should be going to about twice as much. Now, no, not exactly. The algorithm will toss a few or add a few, but we should be in the 300 or to 400 frames range after that. All right, and we'll leave the other. There are some options here you might want to experiment with. To dry run, which is going to show you what's happening without actually applying and saving it. Although you might lose 1 frame, so always keep a good, safe, handy copy of the original AVI file, preferably in a lossless format. And then there's also a cartoon mode. Let's skip that for right now. So what we'll do is render that, and it sees that we are about to create 385 frames. We have initially 194. And so as we're doing that, now is where it's doing basically this visible grid analysis. You know, each grid is moving. Each picture inside the grid is moving. And when we determine which way it's moving, that's when we can say, well, let's blur it to that direction and do a little kind of a morph transition there. But just of that little block, and the neighboring block may go in a different direction and may have no motion and so on. So in the end, we may have a smoother image, a slower image certainly, because we have more frames. And if we play it at the same frame rate, we now have this. And you can zoom in here and you will see very few side effects when compared to the other approach we had earlier, which is the frame blending. Now, I did this once on a 2 tweens mode. I can do that again. All right, so I'm just going to leave the parameters the way they are, and just apply go again. And this will increase it to 765 frames. Alright, and it's obviously going to take a little bit longer. This video is a 640 by 360. You know, the very best results are going to be gotten if you have, first of all, a very fast computer, and also a lot of memory, and you go with high resolution initially, let's say HD, maybe 1280 by 720, and then in the end, once you're done, you can sample it down to a smaller resolution. That's probably going to give you the very best results. Now here, just for the sake of demonstration, I'm working at 640 by 360, which is really not too bad, you know. If you're going to put this on your social media sites or on Facebook or YouTube, it's going to be probably bigger than what most people are going to watch it at anyway. So here we're almost done. We have, you see up there in the top 300 and... No, actually we're not quite done yet. There's still a few more. 380 I think should be the max. 384. A few more, there you go. And so now we have a new total of 764 frames. See, right here it shows we're at frame number 763, which used to be 382, but we have extrapolated. We have produced frames in between. Again, let's have a look at what it looks like now. It's moving very slowly, very little swimming. And it's a nice smooth experience. And so you can do that with some additional parameters and additional options to Perhaps increase the quality by the stochastics averaging of 5, meaning 2 ahead, 2 back, and then 1 in the middle, 5 frames total, 15 frames total as well. And that, of course, is going to take significantly more time. Another option that you might want to use is the refinement pass, which will go adding a pixel for pixel pass with a finer search area based on the first pass. All of that, you know, is something that you may want to experiment with and then determine if your computer is fast enough to actually make this happen. But it's a great way to produce a much higher quality transitional video out of that original fast pass, if indeed you need it. You know, if you have something like you need this now to last 10 seconds, and the original shot maybe was only 2 or 3 seconds long, right? And you need that much more quality on it than what you would get if you did just a time stretch with the frame blending. So let's to finish this, let's have a look at a few others that I produced a little bit earlier. Let's load the AVI. Let's see, here I got the 764 that we just did. No, that was this one here. And then I went up to even higher, which is 1524. Now I've done that with the single frame or the 5 frames, the stochastic 5 and the 15. Let's play this one just to see what that one looks like, and that would probably be close to the ultimate quality achievable with that. Let's see here, 1524 frames, and I'm going to move it over here and play that. So you can see now that it's going fairly slowly because we have so many more frames, and that was actually the intent. It's doing a little bit of blur, but not a obnoxiously flimmering type of blur. There may be some side effects also. A little bit of blur may actually be due to the codec that I chose. I saved this with the XVID codec. You'll certainly want to avoid that if it is absolutely important not to get any side effects from the codec. You'll want to use a codec that's lossless. One more thing to note is that you get border effects. You notice some noise introduced on the edges, like here at the bottom of the video, on the side as well. That is part of the algorithmic side effects. It's unavoidable. The benefit is in the middle of the picture, you know, on the inside, but there is an edge of 16 units in which there is going to be noise because it reaches the edge conditions that does not allow it to properly smooth it and render it there. So what you'll probably want to do at some point when you're done with that is to select the rectangular area of interest if you don't really need this border area and you want to hide it. What you could do is go to the rectangular alpha selection tool and then perhaps give it something like this much, do a rectangular selection, show the selection, where is it there with the alpha overlay, right, and then perhaps control shift to move it around a little bit, and or where is it, there's a couple of other ways to do that. Transform, you know, you can just re-render it, something like this. Yeah, do the selection and then crop to that selection, right? So you could go here and crop the selection. So when you do that, you get rid of the edges that didn't get the very best treatment because it can't do everything. And then of course at that point you might need to either scale it back up to, like, resize it, resample it up to 640 by 360 if that is the dimensions at which you need to have it in the end. Or you might bring it down to smaller size. So for instance, you could bring it down to, resampling it down to something like 480 by 270 or something like that. Let's take a look at one last example here, load AVI. And this one here is one that I rendered, and that one took a little bit longer, and it has 764 frames, but this one I had the checkbox enabled for the refinement calculation, that pass, the refinement pass. So that produces high quality too, and it just was done a little bit faster without the need for 1500 frames. So, oh wait, I still have the selection overlay enabled. There you go, that's it. So that's that, and with that I will just let this run a little bit and hope that this helps understand how you can use the motion prediction module to either produce a motion analysis graph or to introduce some motion blur into the existing frame sequence, into the existing video, or to even produce additional frames, extrapolate them, and get a little bit less of the side effects that you would get if you did the regular time stretch with the frame blending there. Alright, well, thanks for watching, and come back again for another tutorial on PD Pro Howler 7.2.